All right, everyone, let's dive into some cloud computing concepts today. We're going to focus on stuff that's relevant for anyone thinking about taking the CCSP exam.
Yeah, we know studying for certifications can be a little bit of a slog, so we're going to try to make it a little easier and maybe even a little bit fun.
Exactly. We're basically using this document that breaks down a lot of these core concepts.
We'll connect the dots between the core concepts and what you actually need to know to pass that exam.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into it. What is the cloud? It's a term that we hear everywhere, but trying to really pin down exactly what it is can be pretty tricky.
It really is, and I think part of the reason for that is that it's kind of designed to be invisible. We use the cloud all the time. Gmail, AWS, Salesforce, and most of the time we don't even realize it. The cloud is really good at making complex technology disappear.
Yeah, it's like magic behind the scenes making everything work. But for the CCST exam, you really do have to understand what's happening behind that curtain.
Exactly. So to get started, let's take a look at the NIST definition of cloud computing.
All right, hit me with it.
Okay, so it says, cloud computing is a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources.
That's a mouthful.
It
So
is.
where do we even begin with that?
Let's break it down. Let's start with ubiquitous. That basically means it's everywhere. As long as you have an internet connection, you can access the cloud.
Okay, so that means on demand is probably about how quickly and flexibly we can access those resources.
Exactly. We can get computing resources spun up in minutes instead of weeks.
Yeah, I've heard stories about developers being able to shave weeks off projects just because of that.
Absolutely. It's a complete game changer. And then there's network access, whether that's public via the internet or private through dedicated networks. But basically, it's how you connect to those cloud resources.
Okay, so then that shared pool idea, is that like the heart of how the cloud is so efficient? Like we're all sharing this giant invisible data center.
Exactly. Think of it like an apartment building where the
Yeah.
residents share the infrastructure, like the plumbing and the electricity, but they still have their own private apartments.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens when everyone needs those resources at the same time? Like, doesn't that lead to slowdowns or even crashes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's where the concept of noisy neighbors comes in. Like, imagine everyone in that apartment building trying to use the elevator at the same time. Things can get pretty chaotic.
Okay, I can see how that would be a problem.
Mhm.
So how do cloud providers prevent those noisy neighbor situations and make sure that everyone is getting the performance that they need?
Well, a big part of it is resource pooling,
Hmm.
but it's also about smart management of the workload allocation and things like quality of service guarantees. So we'll dive into those a bit more later.
Okay, sounds good. So speaking of who lives in this cloud apartment building,
Yeah.
who are the key players in this whole ecosystem?
Well, we have the obvious ones, the cloud providers like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, and then the customers who are using those services.
Right. But it's not always that simple, is it? Because even the cloud providers themselves can be customers of other cloud providers.
You're exactly right. They might use services from other providers for very specific needs. It creates this complex web of interconnections.
Whoa, that's like a cloud within a cloud.
Exactly.
And then we can't forget about the cloud service partners.
Right. The companies that help businesses navigate this complex world of the cloud.
Yeah, like those AWS and Salesforce partner programs. They're critical for businesses to actually implement and manage their cloud solutions.
Absolutely.
So it's like they're the expert movers that are helping people settle into their new cloud apartment.
That's a good way to put it.
And then, of course, lurking in the background, we have the regulator.
Always there, especially when it comes to data privacy and security. Compliance is a huge factor.
Yeah, things like IPAF for healthcare data or GDPR in Europe. Those are definitely things to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And those are things that will absolutely show up on the CCSP exam.
Okay, so we've got the what and the who of the cloud. But the big question is WHY. Why would anyone choose the cloud in the first place?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The cloud offers some serious advantages over traditional IT. For example, on-demand self-service. That's a key concept that you'll see a lot on the CCSP exam.
Right, so that goes back to the spinning up a server in minutes idea.
Exactly. It's not just about speed, though. It's also about agility. It's about empowering developers to move quickly.
So like a company launching a new website or something, they could instantly scale their resources up and down as needed.
Exactly. That's called elasticity, and it's another major benefit of the cloud.
Okay, so speaking of scaling, can you quickly break down the difference between horizontal and vertical scaling?
Sure. Horizontal scaling is like adding more lanes to a highway to handle more traffic. You're basically adding more servers to distribute the workload.
So vertical scaling would be like widening the existing lanes, making each server more powerful.
Exactly. And the cloud makes both of those incredibly easy.
Okay, cool. So we've got on-demand self-service, we've got scaling and elasticity. What else makes the cloud so appealing?
Well, another big factor is broad network access. You can basically work from anywhere with an internet connection.
Yeah, that's definitely more and more important these days.
Absolutely. And then there's measured service, which means you only pay for what you use.
Right. It's like a utility bill that tracks your usage down to the minute.
Exactly. So understanding all of these key drivers, on-demand self-service, network access, scalability, elasticity, and measured service, they're crucial for the CCSP exam.
Okay, so let's go back to our cloud apartment building for a second and talk about multi-tenancy. The fact that in the public cloud, you're sharing resources with other tenants.
Right. It's all about maximizing efficiency. Think about it this way. You don't need your own personal power plant to light your apartment. You share that with all the other residents.
Right, but just like we were talking about with noisy neighbors, things can get tricky when everyone needs those resources at the same time.
Exactly. And that's where security becomes even more important. So how do cloud providers make sure that everyone's data and applications are secure, even though they're sharing those resources?
Well, isolation is critical. Just like you don't want your neighbors to have access to your apartment,
Hmm.
cloud providers need to ensure that your data and applications are isolated from others.
Right. It's about creating those boundaries and making sure everyone stays in their own lane.
Exactly.
So that brings us to another big question, cost. Because cloud decisions aren't just about cool technology. They have to make financial sense for the business.
Absolutely. And that's where business impact analysis comes in.
Okay, so what exactly does that involve?
It's basically a two-pronged approach. First, we have the cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, so that's where we actually sit down and crunch the numbers,
Yeah,
figure out if the cloud is going to save us money or cost us more.
exactly. But it's not just about the dollars and cents. We also have to consider those intangible factors, like the potential for increased productivity or access to cutting-edge technologies.
Right, but those intangible benefits can be hard to quantify. They can, but they can also be real game changers for a business.
Okay, so then what's the second prong of this business impact analysis?
That would be the return on investment or ROI.
Okay, so that's about proving that the cloud investment will actually pay off in the long run.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's a clear-cut financial win, like
Yeah.
switching from an expensive on-premise data center to a more cost-effective cloud solution.
Right. Those cases are pretty easy to sell to the higher-ups.
But what about those more complex scenarios, where the costs and benefits aren't so obvious?
Well, that's where we really have to dig deep. And sometimes that involves uncovering those hidden costs. Things like staff training, potential downtime during migration, and even the cost of electricity for running those servers on-premise.
So it's about painting a complete picture and making sure we're factoring in all the variables.
Exactly.
Because ultimately, we need to be able to justify that cloud investment to those who hold the purse strings.
Absolutely. And that's a key skill that the CCSP exam is going to test.
Makes sense.
It shows that you're not just a techie, you're a strategic thinker, someone who understands the bigger picture.
All right, so we've talked about the why of choosing the cloud, but let's circle back to those CASBs for a minute. I'm still a little fuzzy on exactly what they do to keep our cloud environment secure.
Think of CASBs as like the security gatekeepers of the cloud. They sit between your organization and the cloud provider, and they monitor and enforce security policies.
So are they like the bouncers at a nightclub, making sure that only the right people get in?
That's a great analogy. One of their key functions is providing visibility into cloud usage, which is crucial for identifying and managing shadow IT.
Ah, yes, shadow IT, the stuff that gives IT departments nightmares.
Exactly. Shadow IT refers to those cloud services that are being used without IT's knowledge or approval.
So how do CASBs help with that?
They can provide insights into which cloud apps are being used, by whom, and what kind of data is being accessed.
So they're not just about blocking the bad guys. They're also about bringing order to the chaos.
Exactly. They also play a crucial role in data security policy enforcement. Let's say your organization has a policy that prohibits the storage of sensitive customer data in certain cloud apps. Well, a CASB can enforce that policy by blocking or redacting that sensitive data before it even reaches the cloud.
Wow, so it's like having a personal assistant that constantly checks your work for errors.
That's a good way to think about it. They can also offer threat protection by helping to identify and block malicious activity in the cloud.
So they're like guard dogs that can sniff out trouble before it even happens.
Exactly.
But CASBs aren't a magic bullet, are they? Organizations still need to take responsibility for their own cloud security.
Absolutely. CASBs are just one piece of the puzzle. Organizations still need to implement strong security practices like access control, encryption, and vulnerability management.
Right, it's about taking a multi-layered approach to security, where CASBs provide an extra layer of protection and control.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the different service models in the cloud. The famous AS alphabet soup.
Yes. IS, PIS, and SAS. Understanding the differences between those is definitely crucial for the CCSP exam. They represent different levels of abstraction and control in the cloud.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the difference between infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service?
Okay, let's start with IS. Imagine you're leasing a plot of land and building your own house on it. You have complete control over the design and the construction, but you're also responsible for all the maintenance and upkeep. That's essentially what IS is. You get the raw infrastructure, like the servers, the storage, and the networking, and you have a lot of flexibility to customize it to your needs.
So it's like having your own private data center in the cloud,
Exactly.
but with great power comes great responsibility. You're in charge of everything.
Exactly. Now let's move on to PIS. Think of it like renting an apartment. You get the basic amenities and utilities, but you can decorate and furnish it to your liking.
Okay, so with PayS, the cloud provider gives you a platform to build and run your applications. But you don't have to worry about managing the underlying infrastructure.
Exactly.
So it's a good option for developers who want to focus on building their apps
Yeah.
without getting bogged down in all the nitty-gritty details of server management.
Exactly. And finally, we have saws, the simplest and most hands-off of the three. Think of it like skiing in a hotel. You just show up and everything is ready for you. You don't have to worry about setting up or maintaining anything.
Okay, so with SaaS, you're basically using ready-made software applications over the internet, like Gmail or Salesforce.
Exactly.
So SaaS is all about convenience and ease of use.
Exactly.
But how do we choose the right service model, especially if we're thinking about the CCSP exam?
Well, that depends on your specific requirements.
Mhm.
IS offers the most flexibility and control, but it also comes with more responsibility. SAS is the easiest to use, but you have less customization options.
Yeah.
And PS falls somewhere in between.
So it's about understanding those trade-offs
Mm-hmm.
and choosing the model that aligns best with your organization's needs and risk tolerance.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the what, the why, and the who of the cloud. We talked about those crucial CASBs, and we've broken down the different service models. But let's not forget about the biggest elephant in the room: security.
You're right. Security is always top of mind when it comes to the cloud. After all, we're trusting our data and applications to a third party, and that inherently introduces some risks.
Right, it's like handing over the keys to your digital castle. You want to be sure those keys are in safe hands.
Exactly. And understanding those risks and how to mitigate them is at the very heart of the CCSP exam.
So how do we evaluate the security posture of a cloud provider and make sure that they're up to snuff?
Well, there are several key areas to consider. First and foremost are certifications and compliance. Think of these as the provider's security credentials.
Okay, so it's like checking a doctor's credentials before scheduling an appointment. You want to make sure they're qualified.
Exactly. Look for providers that have certifications like ISO 29701 for information security management, or SOC 2 for security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy.
And compliance is about meeting those specific regulatory requirements, right? Like HIPAA for healthcare or GDPR in Europe.
Precisely. Compliance is non-negotiable. Failing to meet those requirements can result in hefty fines and damage to your reputation.
Okay, so certifications and compliance are definitely important. What about data encryption?
Yes, encryption. That's all about scrambling your data to make it unreadable to unauthorized parties.
Right, it's like putting your valuables in a safe.
Exactly. We need to make sure that our data is protected both in transit and at rest.
So we need to look for cloud providers that offer robust encryption solutions.
Absolutely. And you also need to understand their encryption key management practices.
Okay, so what about access control? How do we make sure that only the right people have access to our cloud environment and to our sensitive data?
That's where things get really granular. We need to control who can access what data and what resources.
So it's like having a bouncer at the door of your cloud environment, checking IDs and making sure that only authorized personnel get in.
Exactly. Look for providers that offer strong access control mechanisms, like multi-factor authentication and role-based access control.
Okay, so we've got certifications and compliance. We've got encryption and access control. Anything else we need to worry about?
Well, we also need to consider the physical security of those data centers, where our data is actually stored.
Oh, right. Those data centers are like the Fort Knox of the cloud world.
Exactly. They're housing vast amounts of sensitive information. So we want to make sure they're protected from physical threats like theft, vandalism, and natural disasters.
So we're talking about security guards, surveillance cameras, biometric scanners, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. Look for providers that have robust physical security measures in place and make sure that they're transparent about their security practices.
So it sounds like evaluating cloud security is an ongoing process, not just a one-time check.
You're absolutely right. Security is a journey, not a destination. As your cloud usage evolves, you need to continuously review and update your security posture.
And it's a shared responsibility
Mm-hmm.
between the cloud provider and the customer.
Exactly. It's about understanding where the provider's responsibility ends and yours begins. And it's about staying informed about the latest security threats and best practices.
Right. Always stay vigilant.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up for today, let's take a quick peek into the future of cloud computing.
Okay, crystal ball time. What's next for the cloud?
Well, one of the biggest trends is serverless computing. Imagine a world where developers can focus solely on writing code without having to worry about managing any servers at all.
That sounds amazing. But is it really possible?
It's getting closer all the time. Serverless computing is all about abstracting away even more of that underlying infrastructure, making it easier and faster to build and deploy applications.
That's pretty cool. What else is on the horizon?
Another major trend is edge computing, which brings computation and data storage closer to the users or devices that need it.
So think of it like having mini data centers scattered throughout the world, reducing latency and improving performance.
Exactly. This is particularly relevant for applications that require real-time data processing, like self-driving cars or augmented reality.
Okay, so we've got serverless computing and edge computing. Anything else we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, we can't forget about artificial intelligence and machine learning.
AI and ML.
These technologies are already being used in the cloud for a wide range of applications, from fraud detection to personalized recommendations.
It's like having a digital brain that can analyze vast amounts of data and make intelligent decisions.
Exactly. As AI and ML continue to advance, we can expect even more innovative applications in the cloud. And those will undoubtedly have an impact on cloud security.
So it's a whole new frontier for security professionals.
Absolutely.
It sounds like the future of cloud computing is full of exciting possibilities
Definitely.
and probably a few headaches along the way.
Most likely. But that's what makes it so interesting.
Okay, so for those who are prepping for the CCSP exam, should they be worried about these emerging trends?
Well, the CCSP exam doesn't specifically cover these trends in detail. But it's always beneficial to understand the broader landscape of cloud computing.
Right, it shows that you're thinking critically about the future of the field
Exactly.
and how security will need to adapt to these changes.
Precisely.
Okay, so back to the CCSP exam. What are the key takeaways that candidates should really hammer home?
Well, the CCSP exam is all about demonstrating your understanding of cloud security principles and best practices. It goes beyond just knowing the definitions. You need to be able to apply those concepts to real-world scenarios.
So it's not just about memorizing facts, it's about understanding the why behind those facts.
Exactly. For example, you might be presented with a scenario where a company is migrating their sensitive data to the cloud, and you'll need to analyze the risks involved. Consider the different security controls available, and recommend the best course of action.
So it's like solving a puzzle, using all the pieces we've been gathering throughout this deep dive.
Exactly.
Okay, so if we had to boil it all down, what are the absolute must-knows for the CCSP exam?
Well, first and foremost, you need to understand the shared responsibility model. This is fundamental to cloud security. You need to know which security controls the cloud provider is responsible for and which ones fall on the customer's shoulders.
Right, it's about defining those boundaries and making sure that everyone understands their role.
Exactly. Next, you need to master those key cloud characteristics we discussed earlier. On-demand self-service, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and measured service.
They're like the DNA of the cloud.
Exactly. Another critical area is risk management. You need to know how to identify, assess, and mitigate cloud security risks.
So it's about anticipating those potential threats and having a plan in place to deal with them.
Precisely. And don't forget about compliance. You need to be familiar with the major regulatory frameworks that impact cloud security, like HIPAA, GDPR, and PCI DSS.
Right, compliance is non-negotiable.
Exactly. And lastly, make sure you understand the different security technologies and tools that are used in the cloud. Things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, encryption solutions, and of course, those trusty CASBs.
It's like having a toolkit full of security gadgets. You need to know which tool to use for the job.
Exactly.
So it sounds like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the fundamental concepts of cloud computing to the specific security challenges and solutions, we've explored it all with the CCSP exam in mind.
And hopefully our listeners are now feeling more confident and prepared to tackle that exam.
Absolutely. So before we move on to part 2, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
Remember, the cloud is constantly evolving, so never stop learning. Stay curious, explore new technologies, and challenge yourself to stay ahead of the curve.
Great advice. We'll be back with part 2 soon, so stay tuned.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into that business impact analysis.
Okay.
We talked about cost-benefit analysis, but there's also the return on investment, or ROI.
Yeah, so that's about proving that the cloud investment is actually going to pay off.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's a pretty clear-cut financial win. Like if you're switching from a really expensive on-premise data center to a more cost-effective cloud solution.
Right. In those cases, it's pretty easy to make the argument for the cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about those situations where it's not so obvious, where the costs and benefits are a little bit more murky?
Well, that's where we really have to do our homework. And often that means uncovering some of those hidden costs.
Okay, so like what kinds of hidden costs are we talking about?
Things like staff training, potential downtime during a migration, even just the cost of electricity for running those on-premise servers.
Yeah, those are all things that can really add up.
It can.
So how do we convince those business leaders that the cloud is the right move, especially when those costs start to become apparent?
Well, it's really about building a solid business case, highlighting those long-term benefits of the cloud, the scalability, the flexibility, the access to innovation, and showing how those align with the overall business goals.
So it's about taking a more strategic view.
Exactly. And for the CCSP exam, understanding those intricacies of the business impact analysis is key.
Okay.
It shows that you're not just a techie. You're a strategic thinker, someone who understands the bigger picture.
Right. You're not just thinking about the technology itself. You're thinking about how it impacts the business as a whole.
Exactly. It really is. And for anyone studying for the CCSP exam, that's a really important point.
For sure. Okay, so we talked about CSPs in the last part, but I still feel like we could dig a little deeper into what they actually do to make our cloud environment more secure.
Yeah, definitely. Think of a CASB as kind of like a security gatekeeper between your organization and the cloud provider.
Okay, so they monitor and enforce the security policies.
Right.
It's like having like a security camera with X-ray vision constantly scanning for any suspicious activity.
I like that analogy. And one of their key functions is to provide that visibility into cloud usage, which is really important for identifying and managing something called shadow IT.
Ah, yes, shadow IT. That's the stuff that can really keep an IT department up at night.
Exactly. It basically refers to cloud services that are being used without IT's knowledge or approval.
Oh, wow. So people are just out there doing their own thing, and IT has no idea what's going on.
Sometimes, yeah. But that's where CASBs come in.
Okay, so how do they help with that?
Well, they can provide insights into which cloud apps are being used, who's using them, and what kind of data is being accessed.
Okay, so they're not just about like blocking the bad guys. They're also about bringing order to the chaos.
Exactly.
I like it.
And they also play a really important role in data security policy enforcement.
For example?
Let's say your organization has a policy that prohibits the storage of sensitive customer data in certain cloud apps.
Right.
A CASB can actually enforce that policy by blocking or even redacting that data before it ever reaches the cloud.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
It is. And they also offer threat protection. They can identify and block malicious activity in the cloud.
So they're kind of like guard dogs sniffing out trouble.
Yeah.
But CASBs aren't a magic bullet, right?
No, they're not. They're just one piece of the cloud security puzzle.
Okay, so organizations still need to take responsibility for their own security.
Absolutely. They still need to implement those strong security practices, like access control, encryption, vulnerability management, all of that good stuff.
Okay, so it's a multi-layered approach.
It is.
And CASBs just provide that extra layer of protection.
Exactly.
Awesome. So I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
And hopefully everyone listening has a better understanding of what the cloud is all about.
Yeah.
and how to secure it.
That's the goal.
So for anyone out there who's preparing for the CCSP exam, we wish you the best of luck.
Good luck.
And remember, the cloud is constantly evolving, so never stop learning.
Keep learning. Keep exploring.
Exactly. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next time.